All right, in this video we're going to be talking about variables. Now variables are a really easy and simple way of storing values in memory, and you'll find that that's something that's key to programming. Um, we talked a while back about how values in memory are located by your program by memory addresses. So let's start there with a very quick review of an earlier graphic. So here you see the memory addresses. They're counting up this way, so the lower ones are at the bottom, and you see little pieces of data here. And in this video we're going to be looking at this data B, this little chunk right here. So you see data B occupies 3 pieces of memory starting at 50959 right here. So this is going to be our variable in this video. But before we move on to the current graphic that illustrates the variable and its parts, I do want to mention a couple of things. One, it may look a bit complicated when we first look at that. When we first look at the next graphic, but don't let that freak you out. The program and the operating system will take care of all the actual reserving of the memory and the memory addresses and everything. You'll find in the next couple of videos, in fact, that creating a variable and assigning it values and changing values using, well, you'll learn even later on that using those variables is going to be really simple. So the other thing then is you might be asking, well, why are you going through so much time with this video explaining this? And the reason for it is that this concept is very important for, let me see if I can get rid of that top little bar, is very important for you to understand. I mean, it's critical for you to understand. A lot of times instructors will just gloss over this, or even books will gloss over this, but trust me, understanding that this whole concept is going to get a little more complicated and a little more complicated the more you get into programming and the more skilled that you get. And understanding this beginning now is really going to help you to understand what's going on so that you can do what you need to do. Okay, let's start with a real simple overview, and then I'll go back into a little more detail. So a variable has three parts here: the type, the name, and the value. Right? The type. What is that type? It's the type of variable that you create. Depending on the type of the variable that you create is how much memory is reserved for that variable. Not only that, but it's how that information is stored here in memory. In other words, how it's formatted. All right. So it's how much space and how it's formatted. The name designates, okay, where that memory or where that variable is in memory. So when you use it, the program will say, okay, that value at this location, tells you where. And the value, pretty straightforward, it is the value, the actual value that you're storing in memory. All right. So let's look at this in a little more detail here. So you've got your type. Now these it specifies the size. Well, in this it may not be clear in the graphic. These are not like data B. The first, these aren't like 3 separate values. It's all one value, and it says, okay, give me this much space, and I'm going to store the value in that much space. So when you designate the type, it's saying, all right, this variable is going to take up this much space. That's just the way that works. But not only how much space it's going to take up, but how is it going to be formatted? Now, formatted, you might be asking, well, what? I mean, you're talking about memory. That's not, I mean, it's not like you've got fonts and all that. No. It's much more basic than that. Remember that in memory, everything is in binary. So if you think back to when we were talking about integers, remember the whole 2's complement was a very efficient way to handle negative numbers when you're looking at integers, or even when we looked at characters, remember they're stored as whole numbers that represent ASCII and all that type of. That's what's meant about formatted. It's how is all of that binary information, how is it coded? Is in like 2's complement? Does it represent ASCII? That type of thing. All right, on to the name in more detail. It is technically not a name. It is it's called an identifier. However, talking about names and naming is a whole lot easier than talking about identifiers and identifying. But technically it is called an identifier. So if you run into a syntax error in one of your programs and it says something or another about an identifier, what it's talking about is there's some kind of problem with your name and the way that it's been used. So, or maybe it's the way there's a problem. It's like an illegal name. You can't use it or something anyway. Or you're trying to use the same name twice. Okay. And we talked about how it designates the location. Keep in mind here that that these numbers are going up. So what it's doing is pointing to where this variable starts in memory. Okay, because the type says how far it goes, because it designates the size. Right? So it's where it starts in memory. And with simple variables, it's not really referring to the memory address in particular. It's really talking about the value that starts at that address. Now that's a very little picky thing, and don't let that trip you up or confuse you too much. Just think of it as where the location is. Now later, as you become a better and better programmer and advance through, you'll encounter those things and you'll see the distinction between the address and the value at an address. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. Just know that the name is referring to that location, and that every time you run your program, the operating system will give it a different location for whatever variable, depending on what memory is available. And you may run it on a different system, and so this number could be very, very different. But in C++, you don't have to worry about, okay, well, what is the memory address this time? You just use that name or that identifier in the C++ language. That makes everything a whole lot easier. Then the value. Let's say that this is an integer. That's not the right number of blocks, but just for the sake of argument, that's an integer. And let's say you assign it a value of 127. So that value of 127 is coded in here in binary, and it will take up all of this memory. Now that means that there's going to be a whole lot of zeros in here, but all of that memory is designated for that value. That it's going to be in here as binary, but the value of that variable is going to be 127. Alright, I commend you for taking the time to look through this. Again, this is going to be this is going to be very worthwhile for you to understand that that's what's going on with variables. In practice, using them in C++, it's going to be very simple. But as you progress along, you'll hit some new concepts where understanding what's going on in memory is going to help you immensely to understand what's going on with new material and how to do it right and what you're doing and be able to do what you want to do. So again, I commend you for taking the time to watch this video to understand what variables are all about. Now in the next couple of videos we'll show you how to create a variable in C++, super easy, and then how to give it values and how to change the values. Again, in the next couple of videos, in the next couple of sections, it's going to be really simple. But just keep this in mind, realize what's going on. All right, fantastic. This concludes another video for Introduction to Programming with C++, brought to you by LogiKomp. You can access the full course by going to the course homepage at logikomp.com/introcpp. While we are proud to offer this course free of cost to individuals, we do ask that if you continue to use the course, that you support its production and maintenance by making at least a small purchase from LogiKomp Domains and Hosting. You can pick up a custom domain, renewable annually, for around $10 at logikomp.com/hosting. Thank you.